Good morning, everyone. Both those joining us here in the location with our host, Sagicor Bank, and those of you who are joining us virtually. Thank you. This morning, let me introduce our panelists for the discussion. First, we have Lynda, who is the CEO of the Transport Board. Next, we have George Thomas, who is the CEO of Sagicor Bank. We have Mark Boyce, who is the CEO of GovTech. Good morning. And joining us online, we have Director of... Thank you all for joining us this morning. It's wonderful to have you here for this important conversation, building a smart with innovation and creativity in Barbados's global business ecosystem. Barbados stands at an exciting crossroads, a small island with big potential. A smart economy is about more than technology. It's about how we use innovation and creativity to make every sector, from entrepreneurship to finance, from public transport and public policy, to work better and to think better. Let's start with each of our team this morning. When you think of a smart economy in the Barbados context, what does that mean for you? And what do you see as our biggest potential? Lynda, I'll start with you since you're further away from me. Good morning.
Good morning again, everyone. First, let me apologize. I'm a little separated because I have a sniffle. So I'm trying not to share my germs. But a smart economy, particularly as I'm speaking in the role of public transport, a smart economy is one that allows all of us to use creativity, as Connie said. It allows us to use our resources, but it allows public transport or any form of transport on this small island to start looking at creative ways of moving persons around, to start looking at using our data to judge what we will or will not do. It allows us to start looking at things like proper route management. So for all of those things, smart economies for our context really means moving everyone closer together in a more efficient manner for us.
Great. George, what do you?
Thank you. And then you said something about the sniffles. For me, one thing that we have to add in there is wellness. Not just healthcare, but health and wellness is critical.
Absolutely.
When you think about it, when you look at our demographics as a country, us in particular, as really throughout the Western world, we all have aging populations. And in some cases, we have contracting. Here, we have a bit of a contraction. You need people to be able to drive an economy. So one of the focal points has to be wellness. It may sound strange coming from a fintech banker, but wellness and sustainability. It's not enough to just implement the technology or the innovation of today. You know, in banking, we have BIN pay coming. That can't just launch and stay static. It has to, every 3 to 6 months, you would expect that there'd be as there's a stimulus from our economy, other economies, all of us here, you will see improvements in that. What we do here at Sagicor Bank, we are constantly on that dev train, constantly moving. GovTech, you'll be doing the same, and transport for the same. You have to think sustainably, and that's something that's been missing in small island economies for so long. We will get something bright and new, and then we don't think about depreciation, right? You don't think that it got to be renewed and maintenance,
yes.
Right? And what's the next thing? And is the next thing good for us, our particular disposition? So there's that thoughtfulness. Like I said, just to recap quickly, around wellness of our citizens, how we treat ourselves, and general sustainability.
Mark, what do you think?
Yeah, I think we need to be careful. Feedback. I think we need to be careful about just innovation for innovation's sake, right? So we want to build infrastructure, digital infrastructure that solves problems for actual people in Barbados. I mean, that to me is the foundation of the smart economy. So I'm going to talk about some of the boring things that you need. You need the government to work, first of all. You need the services that are delivered by the government to ordinary citizens and businesses to function, right? And then once you have that, and that is simple to say and more difficult to do. Once you have that, you need to have the kinds of infrastructure on which developers can build. So you need developers to be able to see and use the infrastructure that government has and build actual solutions on top of it. And the third thing is we want to be the type of place where people want to live, right? We want to, what I've described so far contributes to that, but it's also up to us to invite companies to come to Barbados, show them that we're open for business, and show them that they can get access, for instance, to our government data, our government processes, to test their fledgling ideas and get them off the ground. So I think it all starts though with the foundational stuff that you don't see. You don't see the plumbing of it. You know, what people actually see is the hedges and the pretty building and the pool. And I think that we need, in order to really enable this smart economy we're talking about, we need to work on the underlying plumbing that people don't see, right? I think that's where it starts.
That sounds like a good summation. Nigel, what about you from an entrepreneurship perspective? What do you think a smart economy in Barbados looks like?
Thank you for the question, and thanks for having me on this panel. I love the answers that we heard so far about use of data in creative ways, about human beings, and about the infrastructure, particularly government infrastructure, the plumbing. I'm a data scientist by training, so I would be remiss if I did not at least mention digital technology, using the best tools available. And the technology is increasing where it definitely could be a leveler of the playing field. It could be the great leveler, but it inevitably will increase the disparity between the haves and the have-nots. I mean, that is what we're seeing, and I'm not seeing anything to suggest that it's going to be otherwise. So we definitely have to use the tools, the best tools available in a smart way, not only the way that it's being used elsewhere outside of Barbados, but in a way that's consistent with what's needed. I want to go further though. I mean, from Raman Sargassum, we are, while my background might be in AI, we at Raman Sargassum are actually looking at, well, I guess we have technology from the bits perspective, digital technology, and then we have the atoms, deep tech. So what we're doing is actually building engineering, real solutions that we believe is going to change the way that we do business, to change the way that we power these tools, power the digital technology, power our transportation sector. And I think at the end of the day, if I could tie it all up, it's about right sizing the technology solutions, the innovations for the problems that we have. It shouldn't be too flashy for the sake of being flashy. And it shouldn't be underpowered if it is that we have access and we can go further.
Thanks, Nigel. Lynda, let's go back to you. Public transportation. That touches every citizen and visitor daily. Even if we don't use it, we consume it in some way. How is innovation transforming the service delivery and efficiency and customer experience in the transport sector?
I think that was one of the best questions I've heard on that topic so far. Haven't had this conversation for a while. So nearly everyone in Barbados, whether you take transport or not, as you quite rightly said, they are impacted by it. Public transportation actually keeps productivity moving. We have found that some of the most vulnerable in our society will be the ones taking public transportation, and they're usually the ones that we need to do more of the groundbreaking type work that's going on, not just sitting in our offices, but those persons who are moving around. For us, our most innovative step recently has been the introduction of electric mobility. It has addressed some of the issues of our carbon footprint. Everyone knows we were using diesel buses and the results of using diesel buses. We have also, apart from introducing electric mobility, there are now 86 of those buses on the roads of Barbados, by the way. but it also opened up discussions about innovation on the island. You now have to look at battery storage, so you're having those conversations. You have to look at renewable energy to power these buses, so you're having more of those type of conversations. So the move to electric mobility addressed a number of our ongoing problems and opened up possibilities for so much more. In addition to the electric bus itself, with that, we were then able to bring in kneeling technology. You need maintenance for that, which is why I was speaking about you bring in these things and then you have to figure out how do you maintain them? What do we do with these batteries afterwards? Is there an afterlife use of these batteries? And there is. So that's another industry that is slowly developing. Then you also have the components that we've added in. So we're going to a cashless situation. So very soon, you will no longer be using cash on board the bus. You'll be able to tap your card and just go. Presently, that has only been done by seniors and school children, but eventually it will be expanded to everyone else. And with that came a number of other spin-off cameras on board the buses. So that was another development in the industry. So we have found that for public transport, we were able to not only improve the movements of our citizens, because without that, we can't go anywhere, but we were also able to add some additional small, maybe industries that can be looked at and some additional innovations that can be added.
Mention at the outset of your response, what I'm going to call accessibility, the differently abled and people who want to be able to access the public transport system, but perhaps don't. And I think that's important in the smart economy perspective and being able to bring everyone and all hands on board to be able to elevate the standard and elevate what it is we're trying to achieve. How have you been able to involve the differently abled in your conversations around accessibility and building out smart solutions to suit them and fit them as well?
Well, one of the first things we did when we were speccing out the new buses was to actually have a meeting with the association, because that's where the kneeling technology came. How do we get them onto public transport? Every single electric bus that comes on this island, through our agency obviously, comes with a wheelchair facility. So there's wheelchair space on the bus, and then there's a wheelchair ramp. The Ministry of Transport and Work is actually looking at the infrastructure around the island to be able to have accessibility. We would have recently, on a policy level, the bill was passed for access for persons with disabilities, making all government buildings now have to have access for them. When you look at that with public transport, and when we're talking bus terminals, we now had to restructure how those bus terminals are done. Something as simple as the width of the feeding bay to the bus door had to be changed, because it was always set up just to be human size like this. It doesn't factor in a wheelchair, which is a lot bigger. So we've had to look at that. We've had to look at our routing mechanism. There are some areas on this island that you cannot board from a wheelchair. When we park a bus on the side of the road, you cannot embark or disembark from a wheelchair. So it is causing all of those conversations to continue in some instances or to now get started in others. But accessibility was one of the major things. So we met with a number of groups as we were designing the specs. So those buses also carry special alerts, so that if you are hearing impaired, you'll get a different alert. Because the buses themselves are so quiet, when you are standing by a bus pole or by a bus shelter, you might not hear it coming. So when it approaches each bus stop now, the driver will slow down and toot the horn, which was an operational change we had to put into place. If you yourself are at the bus pole, you will see that the sign is flashing. So you'll now see the sign from a distance to help persons who have visibility issues. You'll also find that the bus itself, if you are in a wheelchair, there is an access button for you. So you can press that button and the doors will open, which is not something that an able-bodied person would have even thought they needed. But we found that we needed that. So those things we came up with after discussions with a number of the associations. And we are pleased to say that they're proud and happy with what we've done so far. They're obviously asking for more wheelchair access because each bus only carries one wheelchair. So if it's me and my friend and we're both in wheelchairs, then we can't travel together, but we're working on that as well.
Good to hear. I love the collaboration and the inclusivity on that. Not to stick too much on transportation, but in that conversation, I couldn't help but think about route optimization and predictability in that process to be able to help the accessibility and to be able to help the productivity that George mentioned earlier. Are we getting onto that?
You're going to be happy to hear we're getting there as well. So every bus operated by the Transport Board, including the privately owned ones under our TAP program, every bus is now outfitted with GPS tracking. We're presently, as part of our moving to an automatic fare collection system, we're also moving to something, internally we call it Next Bus. So predictive route management is coming. You will be able to stand at the bus full. Actually, my phone is in my bag. But we're presently in beta testing for the app, where you'll be able to stand and check to see exactly where that bus is. So we're moving towards all of those things that are going to make the persons who travel on board the bus much more efficient and much more productive.
Excellent. How exciting. I'm looking forward to all these innovations.
We're looking forward to those.
George, let's transition to you. The support mechanisms around what Lynda just shared and achieving those. Often that comes a lot around financing and partnerships and policy framework that we'll speak about later with Mark. This week at the Global Business Week, we had quite a lot of discussions around the changing dynamics of entrepreneurs or Gen Zs, or the change in workforces where we have more people who are contracted perhaps and contracted with multiple engagements rather than employed with one solution. And those people also starting their own businesses. And in that conversation, there was quite a lot of sharing around access to collateral, the traditional collateral, the bricks and mortar that people would expect versus the intangible collateral that is probably what the newer entrepreneurs or the newer Gen Zs, wherever we are going to want to access. What do you see as the opportunities to finance the acceleration of the kind of transformation that Lynda and the other entrepreneurs that want to access this innovation, but obviously need financing? What are some of the smart solutions that you're being able to offer?
Okay, so let me put some things into context. I obviously have started a bank, so that's a startup. But that's not my first rodeo. I have done other startups, .com startups, fintech startups in other parts of the world, and my own companies. And I can tell you, starting a company is the hardest thing, other than being married and having children, that a human being can do. Because it's literally like bringing both. but it's literally like raising a child. And if you've done it for the first time, there's a lot of naivety and awareness. All of you here have bank accounts. Would you want me to invest that money in something that could potentially fail? Most startups fail. It's a fact. I've had many failures. Not this one, but so that's par for the course. When you start something, especially in tech, something that's innovative, that has never been done before, the probability of it succeeding. So a lot of it, there's so many pivots that you have to do, the ones that win. So if the big things we see out there, and you don't count as a startup, but you're doing startup type innovative business. So a traditional business that is pivoting and doing innovative stuff has collateral, has what people would say backative, that you can extend that financing because there's something substantive there. Brilliant, young, not so young people with innovative ideas. All you have is the idea. A bank has the deposits of the population. You want the bank to give you a fair return on your deposits, right? At a bare minimum, you get you have access to exactly what you put, but hopefully with some interest. That interest comes in investigating government paper, mortgages, car notes, and so steady, safe things, right? You will not want it to be risked on things that could go left or right, even if it had a 50%, because is 1 in 2, right? And the failure rate of startups is not as generous as 50%, right? So the thing where the financial services companies can do is advisory. When you first have an idea as an individual, you'll need to bootstrap it. It can't be enough to write that idea down on a piece of paper. You have to business case it, and then you have to take some personal risk. It may be yourself, your families. You get some crowdfunding to at least create the first widget and show the value. From there now, there's another level of financing, which could be like venture capital. And that's the thing about our economy. We do not have a vibrant capital market for entrepreneurs, and that is what is needed to talk smart economy. And Nigel there knows all about that. And he's a brilliant data scientist, by the way. He's very modest. I know him well. People in his tribe, they need VC money, venture capital money that can, I want to say, take the bet. Because how venture capitalists work, they will bet on several things with the expectation that a couple will yield and pay off, right? That's not how commercial banks are structured, right? That's just the reality. Commercial banks are structured to be safe, and therefore we can bet on stable structures who are now taking some risk, but there's collateral to back the debt, right? And so that there's a lot of awareness that needs to be done among the burgeoning entrepreneur class on the different facilities available to entrepreneurs here, whether it be grant funding, whether it be bootstrapping, crowdsourcing funding. And on the other hand, you know, there needs to be the emergence of a capital market that can support B-stage, those persons that have created the widget now and say, look, you know what, I have done this. This is marvelous. You can see it. You can drink water from it. No, I need to scale this. When it gets to a certain scale, then you can take debt financing, because what does debt finance involve? A monthly bill. So if you have revenue coming in and selling those things, now you can take debt financing for the last sort of scaling to really go over the top in terms of super profitability. So I think that's the role that us banks can play in terms of helping people understand the different stages and the different options, the different pushes and pulls available, depending on what type of innovative business and who you are, whether you're brand new, greenfield, or whether you're traditional, now stepping into the into an innovative space.
I guess in that sort of discussion process, we at the earlier part of your contribution about failure is that we also have to consider some ways of rewarding favor and recognizing that failure is part of the process and not to put that off. But it strikes me.
You gotta be able to dig in, like when things are not going well. Okay, I am not wedded to this idea in exactly this way. I don't have the last brain in the world. I need to pivot. Because all of them, all the ones that you know about, the Facebooks, all of them, they all came close to ruination at some point. I had to pivot. Otherwise, they would have lost their funding, right? So
that made me also think about the initiative. Minister Cummins has quite a bit about it. That is the IMG 100. That is supposed to be the innovative growth market to power Barbadian entrepreneurs. And I guess I can plug because it's a government initiative, but I see that they're having a launch on November the 4th at the Hilton. So we could also probably be looking to see how that IMG or IGM 200 initiative can help some of those entrepreneurs to take them through the continuum. We don't want to lose sight of those smart ideas that could really power in a meaningful way.
And let me say another thing, Barbados economy has grown to the wages on the traditional companies. They were once startups.
Yes.
And they needed that seed, and they needed something to get them to scale to where we knew it. They're now household names. And we are ready for the next wave of them.
Nigel, if we can turn to you, we don't want you to think that we've forgotten you back there.
No, I don't think so.
You operate on the front lines of innovation.
Yeah.
I've been following the rum and Sargassum story with much interest recently, and I've heard its name recently as well in the BBC Lights, as it were. They were spotlighting, I think the series is called People Changing the World, that they had a great segment on. I was driving down the road and I was so excited to hear it being featured on BBC. Well done. Congratulations on achieving what I'm going to call proof of concept and moving that innovation literally onto our words, onto our roads. I think I heard Dr. Henry, Legena Henry say that you have 6 vehicles already on the road that you're having the Sargassum fuel on. And I think she also shared recently that you were retrofitting a fleet of taxis so that you could continue that proof of concept initiative. What do you find are the biggest challenges that you've faced in trying to face scalability to that creativeness and the innovative solutions in Barbados? What have been your stumbling blocks in achieving that, where you've got to so far, and for your next steps?
Thank you for the question. So it's a really good question, and I'm glad George went right before me and got to say very eloquently why it is that a company like ours, like particularly in deep tech, we're not even in digital, which is even slightly easier and slightly quicker to market. A company that's in deep tech that has years before we even see the first dollar of revenue. Essentially, if we go to a commercial bank, we you know, it's almost a flat no. And in fact, we actually did have that experience with a very reputable bank. I happen to know the CEO well. We actually had to make one of those pivots when we realized, okay, you know what, we need to bootstrap and start to so we're actually pivoting in creating a market for our rum and Sargassum, our renewable natural gas, by using traditional natural gas. And so this is going to be revenue generating, still innovative, but revenue generating, a revenue generating pivot that's going to be able to bootstrap this deep tech. And so, you know, we are ready to take on debt financing. And like I said, I knew one of the CEOs well and said, you know what, we're doing this pivot and we're ready for debt financing. And you know, it was a flat out you know, that's outside of our risk profile. So it's really challenging. I mean, it's not just financial. You know, there's obviously also going to be technical, human resource challenges. There's regulation challenges, regulatory challenges. There's customer market uptake. But I mean, all of those are there. But in terms of requiring financing, it can't be, if that's the only thing I speak about, that would be justified. Because as George just mentioned, it's not just about debt financing, commercial banks. I mean, VCs are required, grants are required. But even if we just take those 2 examples, grants, you know, you see what's happening with USAID, which was one of the biggest funders, and in fact, we had been accepted to USAID. Only for a few weeks later that it was shut down, and then you start to see things like Europe going forward. And I applaud the government of Barbados, but we have actually applied to BESF and some of the Barbados funding as well. We have applied to grant funding and not been successful, although you know, the government is fully behind us, but in the words of the minister. And so that's grants, you know, even though it's challenging. And then we have VCs, and we've had you know, literally almost weekly. I think it's not difficult for you to believe, you know, now that we've been on BBC and we're going to be on the Economist magazine, and we're actually talking to the Washington Post in a few, you know, as well. You know, even VCs contact us even weekly, but you know, it's really difficult. As George says, there isn't that capital market, and we have seen. So as you mentioned, Dr. Henry, our CEO, who unfortunately couldn't be here today. She wanted to be here to do this. We've seen our experience that has been documented where women co-founders find it most difficult to raise venture capital financing and equity injections. And we've seen that too. It's not what I would have expected. It's not what I thought going in. Like George said, there's a lot of naivety, but that's been our experience. So I'm gonna leave it there from now.
A lot of naivety, but we need to harness all of the collective power and to be able to create the smart economy that we're talking about. It sounds as though we're going back to around a conversation around the appetite that I think probably more regional banks, I'm going to say, not necessarily global banks, but regional banks tend to have a more risk-averse perspective. And what we're talking about in the innovative and creative space might not necessarily sit very comfortably next to that lack of risk taking or the diminished risk appetite that we have.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't know you asked. Absolutely. I mean,
no, I appreciate that.
When you look at large
Sorry.
economies, like the US economy, which has vibrant capital markets, where's that money coming from? That money is coming from angel investors.
Yes.
That money is coming from hedge funds, people who, private equity funds, who are dedicated towards taking large sums of wealth and multiplying it with the owners of that wealth's consent. We want to take this amount of risk, right? So that's a key point that one needs to understand.
Yeah, that because you said that earlier. But what I was going to say was, in addition to the mentorship and the advisory services, how can we support those entrepreneurs more in the continuum of actually getting more proof of concept solutions that we're talking about to really future-proof
their product? So you heard Nigel pivoted to, okay, what his tech is more future forward leaning. There's a lot more experimentation, design, development before an end product, but he's creating an intermediary product. And we must be open towards supporting the entrepreneurs, because when you see it might be something that you could get somewhere else, but they're actually bootstrapping the business. And the path he's taking is the normal path for those that end up being successful. Pivoting, trying to find ways of making money to bootstrap, self-bootstrap, before you get to a place where there's an angel investor, some private person that says, look, you know what? Here's $200,000. Here's $500,000. And then from there, you go to the next level where now you can, again, but we need to support by buying the product.
And I was at a meeting recently with Dr. Henry, and we had a discussion around scalability. And of course, everyone wants to, all the lenders, even at the angel investor level, everyone wants to make an impact. But impact means that it's a conversation around scalability. So those are dynamics that we have to navigate. But I want to involve Mark in this conversation now, because of course, GovTech is probably one of the newer kids on the block. So demystify it for us and tell us what GovTech is, and what is the national vision for using GovTech to position Barbados as a smart and globally competitive economy?
Sure. So, I mean, I think GovTech's remit is really, really easy to describe. Probably the easiest in all of government. We are there to make sure that government services work, in a nutshell. So every service that is delivered from the government to citizens, our goal in the medium and longer term is to make sure those citizens are modern, fast, accessible, secure, and most importantly, user-centered, that you fix the problem that you came there to solve, right? As for how we help position Barbados globally, I'm going to go back to what I was saying earlier, which I think is the most important, which is that in furtherance of our core goal, which is to make services work, we're going to have to build certain digital components that the private sector can also use, right? So we need to build the rails upon which developers can build to actually build the solutions that will further help citizens, right? Part of those rails are not just the software, but also the data, right? So government needs to be in the business of releasing properly anonymized data that developers can use to build things, right? That will ultimately help Barbadians. I think that GovTech too needs to, as I've mentioned before, play a more proactive role, not just in trying to fix what you might call some of the more vanilla flavored government service problems. Things like you want to renew a driver's license, you want to apply for benefits, you know, you want to set an appointment to go to the hospital. Those are all problems that may span multiple departments. I'm not suggesting that they're necessarily easy to fix, but they are solved technological problems, right? The main issue in getting them solved is the people and the process, less so the technological aspects of them. But there are still big, hairy problems that Barbadians face for which there's no obvious solution. There are problems around violent crime. There are problems around education. There's problems around housing, right? And we at GovTech, we need to be the enabling environment to bring in companies, local and international, and allow them to try to test their solutions in our small environment. So this is the one thing that a small country can do, right? We don't have a whole ton of advantages, but one thing that we can do is we can invite companies in and we can tell them, here, we both win, right? You got a test bed, you're a fledgling Silicon Valley company, you want to test your idea, here's a whole government in which you can test it out. And what we get is hopefully a solution and maybe equity or some kind of revenue share in your company, right? So I think that's one of the ways in which we are going to be positioning Barbados as this kind of place where if you're an international company, you have good ideas, you can come here to try to test them out. Locally too, we are playing around with different kinds of procurement, right? Like government procurement is known to be Byzantine and, you know, very difficult to access for small companies. And at GovTech, our unit of delivery is a team, right? So we're not really interested in procuring, generally speaking, the services of big companies that promise like some kind of 5-year solution. We would rather build the solution to the extent possible ourselves in an agile and iterative way. And we're going to be looking for either individual people to slot into particular roles in those teams, or we're going to be procuring companies, but looking inside of the companies at the underlying individuals to bring those into our teams, right? And I think this too is a way of fostering innovation in the private sector, right? Because these private companies can help contribute to what Barbados is doing, even if they're not solving some big, hairy problem, right? So I think that there are several ways in which we can make ourselves known as an entity that companies globally might want to gravitate towards, starting with some of the foundational work.
I like the idea of that collaboration and inviting a rich throughput of ideas from all perspectives. And I'm curious about regulation around that and balancing regulation with agility, ensuring that there's accountability while encouraging that innovation. How do we balance that? Sandbox.
Regulatory sandbox where Mark alluded to the tailoring the regulation to the level of risk, right? So if you can ring fence the level of risk, then you can make the amount of regulatory pressure slightly lower, right? And so you can do that via sandbox. And you can also make sure that the regulations that you do set, they are, first of all, more closely bound to the people who are actually doing the innovation. So that there's a tighter feedback loop around, as you know, as what is being built is taking shape, as the risks are taking shape, the regulation can be evolving in tandem, right? So it's really about making the regulatory environment more agile itself. And then having the regulation be reviewed more regularly, right? So you had this initial idea about how you should be regulating this thing. You have maybe a sandbox environment that George said. And as after a certain amount of time, you then review what you set in place originally and see, okay, well, is this fit for purpose? Is it too strict? You know, how am I stifling something before it has even had a chance to really take its first breath, right? So I think it's about really trying to make the regulatory environment more agile, closer to the innovation itself, and able to be updated at a more regular basis.
Agility that you're talking about, that agility and collaboration, I think they have got to work in hand, and they've got to work in a rhythm that is fit for purpose. And that, I think, is one of the ideas that we need to, or one of the solutions that we need to embrace a lot quicker, the agility and the continuous collaboration, the continuous flexing, and continue to make it fit for the purpose wherever that purpose is in the continuum. Let's talk about human capital for a bit. I mentioned earlier that we're a small economy, but we're also a very ambitious country. And we have obviously limited resources, including human capital. About 3 years ago, I wrote an article for Business Barbados at the time, the publication. And it was around the recently conducted survey that found that we were perhaps about 80,000 people short of where we need to be developmentally to achieve the ambitious targets that we want to achieve. We often talk about exporting our people and not getting them back. But with the environment being so digitally focused, how can we claw back? We talked a lot about before in our little necks about regathering and using that as an opportunity to bring talent back, or even attract talent, to let them know what we're doing here, what innovative things that they can slot into. But how can we attract those resources back, or have access to those resources in a meaningful way to really see those innovative solutions that we're discussing touch and include them?
Well,
From my end, I think one of the things that we are sadly lacking is apprenticeship programs in this digital space. Again, we brought in a bunch of electric buses, and then we were working with SJPI, who was doing a course on auto electrics. Yes, Samuel Dratman Prescott. They were doing a course on auto electrics, but it did not match the level that we would have required. So as part of our purchase agreement for the buses, we had a training component included. So persons from the manufacturer had to come into Barbados and conduct training, not just for the drivers and our in-house maintenance team, but they had to do training with the first responders so they would know what happens if something occurs on one of those buses. They had to do training with the Barbados Defense Force, which is the alternate drivers for our buses if there's a national emergency. And more importantly, they had to do training with SJPI so that they would have a foundational program they can start building on. And one of the other things we did is we started to bring in apprenticeships. So persons would come and work with us for a period of time, 3 months, 6 months, to get a feel of these buses, because electric mobility is exploding on this island, but we didn't have the foundational skills, and we definitely didn't have the human capacity to do it. So children coming out of school who still today's world believe that you need to be a lawyer, doctor, or whatever. We do have some children coming out of school who are understanding the value of technical skills. And those are the ones that you need to try to harness. I don't know if this is the correct term for it, but in my head, I'm calling it a digital lab, where we can then put those different types of youth growth people and say, okay, let's train you in these particular areas because this is what we are going to require for the immediate future. And if we're continuing on this path for the long-term future. And that I think is lacking in Barbados. We don't offer that type of thing. We still have places, even though we have places like the TVET Council and so on, they're not embracing this type of innovation. And that needs to be managed and looked at and pushed forward. Give you a little story. In our organization, a young man developed a management accounting program for us, not in the true management accounting term. But what this program does is it connects all of our departments. So if the marketing department is going to be selling a charter, someone needed to tell the operation department so they could supply the driver. Someone needed to tell the wash stand so they can make sure the bus is washed. Someone needed to tell finance so they can make sure the money is collected. We did all of that previously with paper. So you write up a piece of paper and it goes here. You write up a piece of paper, it goes there. A local young man developed a management program for us that connects all of my departments. So right now, if I book a charter, when that charter goes into the system, the finance department knows they have to send for the money. The operation department knows they have to roster the driver. The wash stand knows the bus has to be washed. The maintenance knows that this bus needs to be in a particular condition. But IT knows that the announcing system needs to be working. All of those things are now connected without me having to leave my desk. But he had to learn this somewhere else. And he has not been able to share that knowledge because he's a one man, as we were all discussing. And he doesn't have the capacity to build up the knowledge base. And if we don't have more of his programs going on, he's going to look to move somewhere else that will give him facilities to do that. So we've been introducing him out to other people. Look at what he has to offer. It might not work for your industry, it might not work for your company, but here we have a local person who's doing that. And that brings me back to what George was saying earlier. The mentorship is needed. And because of the financial component of being an entrepreneur, it has to be managed quite carefully because, again, one young man, you know, but I believe we need that type of hub so we can train up our youth and get them ready for what is coming. Because we are not going to be the ones leading this charge. We may have done the foundational work, but we will not be the ones leading this charge. And we need to have persons who understand what we're looking to do going forward.
And it strikes me that I think I remember reading recently that we were trying to create some kind of skills and availability catalog. I'm going to use the word catalog, but some sort of database where we could, a registry, where we could essentially input all of the skills that are available so that when people are looking for skills, we have one central place that we could look at. I don't think that we have that kind of tool. And I could see how that kind of tool could be useful, but I can also see that sort of tool needs significant maintenance and upkeep to make sure that it is kept current to make it really useful. So I look forward to seeing some more happening in that area. But I guess the contractor that you mentioned will ultimately see himself being one of those people that I mentioned where they have multiple contracts. I could see him having lots of relevance across government agencies and lending out, but sometimes these things are the best kept secrets. So we need to have a lot more open conversation about what we have available and collaborate a lot more to be able to share that limited human capital resource that we were talking about. George, it looks as though you wanted to make an intervention.
Chair. So, Lynda, what you spoke of the inside out, like people that are here, mentorship, and also leveraging the skill set, but the outside in, those that have left. And I mean, I went to Florida Tech and LSU with a couple of Bajans. Some have come back and some have stayed out there. I mean, I'm one that's come back. But because of how tech is today, how the world is today, you don't necessarily have to be here I mean, I had a conversation with a Barbadian investment banker. I mean, doing major deals just yesterday. But we're not aware. So again, that not just who is here, the skills that's here, but throughout the diaspora, and being able to plug into those persons. I mean, we have a distinguished engineer at Microsoft. I'm not expecting him to leave his job at Microsoft, but maybe there's some advisory services he can lend, and there are others like him. I mean, we have a couple of rocket scientists, literally. One person working for NASA and a relative of mine that works for defense contractor. These guys actually work on things that go into space, right? They're Bajans. And we should be able to tap into them and the younger ones that are out there. So they don't necessarily have to come back home. If you're consultants, you can work on multiple gigs. You can be working on your gigs up there and also working on stuff here. So I think it's something that like that we need to think about.
I agree completely. I mean, GovTech is right now recruiting. We're probably going to be recruiting ferociously for the next several years, maybe indefinitely. Because
someone in the diaspora asked you yesterday, they want to.
You gave him my number.
I
You gave him or her my number.
I told him, give me his papers and I'm going to
Right.
give them to you. So just yesterday that happened from England, actually.
I don't think we're going to be able to find the skills that we need at the rate that we need them. And so part of this is going to be capacity building. Part of what we do, part of what our role will be to find experts globally, take their skills, but also as part of the contract with them, have them train people, right? People in the private sector who are working with us, but also people from within government. So we've launched a secondment program within government. There are certain type of skill that we couldn't really find in the private sector here. And therefore we said, okay, fine, we're gonna have to use international consultants, but the people who applied in the private sector that we thought had, some of the raw materials, even if they didn't have the experience, we're gonna have them train under these international experts. And several people from throughout the public service. We've put them on a 6-month minimum, maybe 2-year maximum secondment program where they can acquire some of these skills. But in addition to kind of education, I think there's 2 more things that we need to provide. One is opportunity. So I think we need to be doing cool things, right? Like talented people want to be working on cool projects, right? That's what it boils down to. They want to be working at the cutting edge. And that's what at GovTech we plan to be doing, not for the sake of it, but just because we have interesting problems and they will require interesting solutions, right? And the second thing is inspiration, right? Sure, you can go and work somewhere else. You can go and work. Good Bajans are found everywhere in the world, right? But people also want to feel, certainly as they begin to get older, I know that I've begun to feel that they are making a difference, right? I mean, you can give people the opportunity to say, look, you are changing the way that Barbadians experience Barbados, right? Like what you're doing here will make a difference in history, right? That is something I think is attractive to people. I've seen the attraction in people that we've already hired, right? People who are probably making less money than they could be making elsewhere, but they want to feel as if what they're doing, they look around Barbados and they see a lot of foolishness, and they say, if I can have a hand in fixing some of this foolishness, then I want to be a part of it, right? So I think that, providing the training, providing the opportunity, providing the inspiration are all parts of this puzzle.
I think as well, what you said from that, Mark, is that we have a real opportunity as well to do something that gets a lot of attention, and that is storytelling. They're powerful stories that we are all, I am sure, just thought about that we could share to be able to encourage a lot more of that collaboration and that interest and that aspirations, etc. Barbados has always been about developing people. And if I look in the global business sector where we operate, where BIBA's members operate, historically, that was always about developing people. And that was one of the reasons why Barbados sought to differentiate itself with its double taxation treaty network, so that we can encourage as much of that trade here to be able to cross-fertilize ideas and to develop our people. And we've seen in the global business sector that has been very successful. So I think that kind of storytelling needs to be shared a lot more, and all of the wonderful ideas that we are talking about, but nobody knows about. I think we need to really get into the better habit of storytelling and letting people see themselves in those stories. So I would challenge you to get on board with some of that storytelling, because I'm sure you all have great stories to tell. True ones.
Yeah.
So another theme that we saw this week at the Global Business Week that was discussed quite a lot was around AI, obviously, because that is a hot potato at the moment, and also a lot around trust and building that trust. And with the digital trade and technology developing as rapidly as it is, I think that there is an inherent distrust often in the process around some of the tools, around some of the data that you spoke about earlier, Mark. What do you see as the threats for us sticking very comfortably in our little distrust network and not building on what could be a really trustful and useful environment to deliver on that innovation and creativity? Don't all answer at once. We just made fail. From I mentioned that AI and trust, we discussed it quite a lot at the Global Business Week Forum this week. Lots, almost every presentation had some element of AI and trust in it. But I think that there's also a lot of distrust in the use of digital tools. Some of it may come around data, maintenance of data, the privacy of data, and the misuse of data. And I know as well, if I didn't say this before, but I know that the World Economic Forum, for example, earlier this year, identified that for the first time ever, misinformation and disinformation are in the top 5 issues that will disrupt global economies for the first time ever in the short term. So we have climate being number 1, and the next issue that is going to disrupt our global economies is misinformation and disinformation. And a lot of that comes around trust. How do we help build that trust around all the digital tools that we're using? And how do we see ourselves helping our communities to build that trust?
I mean, you're right. We have lost, certainly government has lost a lot of trust with citizens, and they were right to lose it, to be honest. There were several instances, several breaches, for instance, recent breaches that happened. So I understand why people would feel as if, you know, the government systems are not as secure as they could be. And I think that it's up to the government to try to regain that trust, right? And regain it through competence and through, as you said, storytelling, right? So we have to show that we are worthy of your trust, right? By putting the right governance mechanisms in place for dealing with your data, for instance. And we also have to say what we are doing. So we have to be more communicative with the public about the measures that we are taking and why this time is different, right? So I think that as for some of the bigger problems that you're describing, I think these are problems that the world is grappling with. So I'm not going to pretend I have a solution right now to how we're going to solve disinformation. You know, there are the obvious routes that, you know, as a citizen, you should make sure that you're getting information from trusted sources and so on. But disinformation travels much more quickly than real information. Disinformation now has the quality of looking very real because it's AI assisted. It's going to be tricky, right? It's going to be tricky to solve that problem. I think we're going to have to encourage, certainly as a government, we're going to have to encourage good practices from citizens in terms of where they get their information and what they believe. But I don't think it's going to be an overnight solution.
That's professional. I like that you slid governance in there very, very early, because often I think we have a governance problem more than we have a financial problem in this story. George, you wanted to say something?
Things. One, from the government perspective, I can say that for the first time we have a CISO, government has hired a chief information security officer who is a top-notch professional. I worked alongside this lady for many years. She's very good and very meticulous. So the path is being set. From an AI and trust perspective, if any of you have opened a bank account with this bank, Sagicor Bank, you've encountered AI, you just didn't know it. When you took the picture, when you scanned your government issued ID and your proof of address, machine learning, because the machine had to learn what an ID looks like, and pixel by pixel, it compared your face with what's in there. So you encountered machine learning and artificial intelligence there. So we're using that, which is not generative AI, which has been undergoing a lot of hype. The challenge with generative AI is the sources. Generative AI exists because the internet exists. Without the internet, there's no generative AI because most of these large language models have combed the internet, and like Google has for years, and pulls it all in. So if there's disinformation out there, the LLM will have some hallucinations. And then it's only as good as the algorithms behind it as well. So the algorithms hallucinate, the data might be bad. So there's governance and controls. And I will really leave it to the AI person, the data scientist, Nigel, to speak in more detail. He's much more qualified than I to speak to the specifics, but suffice it to say that corporations like mine and the one that we're embedded in are working assiduously on governance around how and where and when to use AI, specifically generative AI. There's a big bubble, and we talked earlier about entrepreneurs risking trying things. There's a lot of that risking, and out with the vibrant capital markets, there are billions and billions and billions of dollars being thrown towards people with ideas, and you see the hype. We're in a hype cycle, but within every hype cycle, as Sam Altman from OpenAI said, there's a kernel. There's some generative AI is not all throwaway. A lot of it is hype, but then there is some goodness there, and it's really how we govern the inputs into these solutions, right? And how we use it prudently and judiciously. You still need that human touch. You hear a lot of talk about no more software developers, we're gonna all use AI. No, the generative AI is like a junior developer still at UE, still at university, and you still need a senior over their shoulders doing the code reviews. If you don't do that, you'll fail. I played with generative AI, developing Python and C++ for 6 months, just out of my own interest. And then there's lots of hallucinations. I mean, every 6 months it gets better, but I suspect it's still hallucinating. That's why you're seeing now there's a slight turn, there's a pivot. MIT found 95% of generative AI projects fail. There's a reason for that. Hallucinations, among other things, but when you use good governance and you're sober about it, not caught up in the hype. But there's a lot of hype around the internet in the beginning too. I worked in the .com space, I could tell you, and 10 years ago, there was a lot of hype around fintech and blockchain and so on. But the blockchain has its use, its purpose. Internet certainly has shown us it has its use and .com tech. And similarly for generative AI, it does have its use and its purpose. So governance, very important.
Wanted to add anything to that?
Sorry, I'm gonna make. I think it's me you were asking. The audio broke, but just okay, good.
Yes, I was asking whether you
No,
wanted to say anything.
no. I mean, I think a lot has been said. There's no silver bullets. It's not the need for trust and the desire for trust and the desire to earn the trust of the consumers is not something that's gonna go away. And I think it's just up to us as consumers to use the market itself to force the suppliers to earn your trust through various transparency initiatives. George just told you we're using AI. Force them to not make it a secret. And I think that's what we could do right now. And just on both consumers and providers would need to accept that this is going to be something that's going to continue just going forward for the rest of the time.
Thank you, Nigel. I'm minded that this is a public discussion forum. So before we get too near to the witching hour of closing, I wanted to see whether there were any questions from the audience. JP?
If y'all would permit me. Yeah, as I was saying, I want to lower the altitude of the conversation a bit, if you permit me to do that, and try to get into some examples and so on. Transport. While we have been making progress in terms of reducing our carbon footprint and so on, one of the biggest challenges we seem to have is congestion. And I was talking to a client not too long ago, and he actually indicated that that is one of the negatives for potential investors coming to Barbados. They move away from highly congested cities, and they're coming out to Barbados and they're encountering the same congestion. Now, is there any initiatives, with the transport to deal with that whole situation? I'm not sure if public transport is the way to go, but we know that that's a cultural issue. That's a serious cultural issue, and I don't think we can get a lot of traction there. In fact, in most cities, a lot of the mass transport is more trains and that kind of thing, and not necessarily buses. So if you can speak to that.
Yes, well, let's start first with the size of our territory. So for us, mass transit is actually buses and not rail or anything of that nature. There are a number of initiatives that are being fleshed out as we speak to address the issue of congestion. When we move from diesel buses to electric buses, unfortunately, the capacity lowered. So whereas the diesel bus carried 42 seated passengers, the electric bus carries 27. That's because of all the batteries and so on that are now there. So for every one diesel bus, we now have to provide 2 electric buses. That's why we're slowly building up the capacity of the number of electric buses. But there are also a number of other solutions coming that will not only be tied to public transport. You're going to have, we're discussing right now removing the school children from mass transit and giving them their own dedicated school bus system, which frees up capacity on the mass transit side. You're also looking at things like hybrid solutions. There are a number of private investors who already have vehicles and transport for specific schools. How can we encourage that into a wider sphere? We're looking at how we regulate the existing PSVs, the privately owned public service vehicles, to make sure that we're all operating under the same governance and the same rules and conditions and the same style of vehicle. So as we speak today, these things are all happening to address the issue of congestion on the vehicles. And once we do that, we are going to be spending a lot more time educating persons. I have several people who come to me and say, well, if that bus is going to be air conditioned, as you say it is, and it's going to have access to Wi-Fi, as you say it does, and I can sit there and do what I have to do and not drive myself, as long as that bus is reliable, I am prepared to park my vehicle, which assists in some of the congestion. We get that so often, people don't understand. One of the things they'll also say, obviously, is I want to park my vehicle in a safe space. So we're talking park and ride. I want to park my vehicle and know that I am not going to be stopping every 2 minutes. So you're talking express services. So those discussions are actually happening as we speak to make sure we can address some of the issues that you would have just raised.
The big hairy problems that I was talking about before that I think GovTech will also be looking at. We right now have a data science challenge out that focuses on congestion. So we have cameras set up at the roundabout at Warrens, and it is basically monitoring the traffic, and we are challenging data scientists to figure out whether there are elements of human behavior. For instance, how often do we use turn signals when we go into roundabouts? If there are elements of human behavior that actually influence the throughput of a roundabout, right? And then using this to say, well, actually, while there are infrastructural solutions that we're alluding to here that will no doubt have an impact, there may be behavioral changes that we can make that might have a smaller but non-negligible impact on things like throughput at roundabouts, right? So just trying to catch low-hanging fruit where we can.
Add to that, you were talking about persons coming into the territory with expertise and they're bringing in software. One of the things that is being tested also as we speak, there's a lot happening in Barbados right now. There is a software program being tested to give buses right of way. So it's working in conjunction with the traffic lights to allow buses to come through the traffic lights in a speedier manner. So we're testing that as we speak as well. It is literally in its testing phase. And if that can make a difference, that will assist again with some of the congestion on our roads.
Okay. I had a question for each of you actually. And since the
Of course.
GovTech guy chip in there, let me go to him. And he did present a solution. And that's what I wanted to know. You were saying that we need solutions and we're encouraging, companies to come in. But what are these solutions? If you can give us an idea, because, as I say, I want to lower the altitude of the conversation and let's get into some nitty gritty. What, as far as you're concerned, are 1, 2, 3 of the major solutions that that government is looking to have resolved or solved? If you were to hit 1, 2, 3.
Well, we're not really looking for solutions right now to particular problems at the moment, right? So it's not as if we have a laundry list of big hairy problems and we are saying to the world, come and try to fix them.
Misunderstood that.
Although that is sorry, no problem. No problem. Although that's something that we might do, that's not a bad idea. It's something that we are certainly going to think about doing. Right now, what we're most focused on is the delivery of services within Barbados, right? So we're a pretty new company and our main focus right now is on just setting some of the foundational work, putting some of the foundations in place.
Okay. So where would you say we are currently in terms of dealing with delivery of services in Barbados? If you're talking about a scale of 1 to 100, what are we talking about? And give us an idea where we are and, what's the likelihood of moving forward with some of the more pressing things? Because, we talk a lot and so on, but we really want to hear where we are and where we need to go.
Talk is cheap, right?
Absolutely.
Where are we? I would say we are 13. You want a number of 100? I'll say we're at 13.
As low as that. Oh.
I'll say 23.
Okay.
I think that there are many problems. I mean, I could spend a long time talking about all of them, but I don't think that's what you want to hear. You know what the problems are. But just in brief, government services, for the most part, are not accessible to everyone. Many of them are not online. To the extent that they're online, they are not usable. They are often not connected to one another. So you have to send the same information to multiple different departments. They don't look and behave in the same way. So you have to relearn services every time you use.
But we don't give us too much because we promote Barbados, so we don't want negativity to get out there.
Well, this is all a segue. This is all a segue into how things are going to get wonderful.
Right.
So I'm just describing now what the situation is. But and I think that there's a lot to fix from my point of view. Right. Okay. I think that GovTech has recently assembled a team. We are in the process. In the next 9 months, we're going to be assembling 10 to 15 more of these teams. And we are going to be working on a prioritized listing of problems. So we've already spun up a site, which is alpha.gov.bb, and I would encourage all of you to go and look at it. It is a alpha.gov.bb. If you go to gov.bb, there's a banner there saying, we're testing out something, give it a try, and it points you to alpha.gov.bb. It is a site where we're going to test and learn. So we're trying to move away from this big bang approach where we sequester ourselves in a cave for 6 months and then present you with something to much fanfare. Instead, we're going to be releasing updates every 2 weeks or probably more regularly than that. And you will be able to see as we are making things better. Right now, there are 10 entry points on there, which are descriptions basically of how to use services. That might not sound like much, but right now it can be difficult even to know where you have to go, how long it takes, what documents you have to take. I don't know about you, but many times in my interactions with public services, I end up going somewhere, throwing away that occasion because they tell me now I got to go back and get my birth certificate and then coming back another day, right? So
Yeah.
the point is to put authoritative information in one place so that you know what this service looks like, even if we have not begun the deeper transformation of this service yet. And then figuring out, okay, well, what are some of the deeper transformations that we're going to do? We've already begun a deeper transformation of the birth certificate issuance process, for instance, right? Birth registration and certificates issuance process, which now requires you to go to the Supreme Court twice. Once to fill a bunch of paperwork, the second time to go and pay and get the document, right? And in a softly way, we're making this better, right? So it's going to be now that there you can fill out all this information online first. There'll be a fast lane when you go to the Supreme Court. So you still have to go to collect it. You still have to go and pay, but you go once. You go in a fast lane when you go, and therefore the experience is much better, right? So this is just the beginnings of what we are working on. But again, we are now building out our team. And the idea is to have a prioritized list of these services that we are going to be working on.
Right. Well, we don't envy you because you have a mammoth task, and all we would say is that we need to support you. Okay, my last question, I'm glad you all have entertained me so long. My last question is for the banker. You know, it's amazing how we tend not to focus on, I think our online guy spoke about it. He mentioned it, but the banker didn't emphasize it as much. The whole area of grant funding, whether we like it or not. I mean, if you look at other countries, they pour so much money into grant funding. And of course they can because the money is there. United States prints money and that becomes legal tender. So they pour a lot of money into their grant funding. And so on the bottom line is that for a lot of startups and so on, a lot of them need actual grant funding to get them up and moving. That's the reality. And that's why I believe personally, as I see it, a lot of these companies suffer so badly and so on because the banks not entertain them unless they reach a certain stage. To get to that stage, they need grant funding. I mean, they can't pull information from themselves and so on. And that's one of the key areas if we are going to really encourage entrepreneurship and so on. We got to find ways. Now, overseas, there are foundations that do it. There are accelerators. Government has programs. Let's face it, guys, they pour plenty money into the small business sector to develop in other countries. And we then have to try and do some of that. There are a lot of private funding. I mean, some of these private persons have money. I mean, we got to encourage them to put some into, you know, entrepreneurship for the good of Barbados. I mean, some of this money they can't spend in a lifetime. We got to unlock some of this money that they have, you know, to help develop the country. And that's the reality. You can't expect to develop a lot of these small businesses and they don't have grant funding. And I leave that with you. You want to respond to that, banker?
Okay.
As a person that was on Route 128, which is the East Coast Silicon Valley, we never touched JP Morgan Chase, Bank of America. We never touched bank. We went to the venture capital community. That is what is set up. That's what I said earlier. You do not go to a bank unless it's an investment bank that is set up specifically with persons with high net worth individuals who have said, I want to allocate my funds for venture funding. But that is not the purview of commercial banks. And I do not know any tech entrepreneur in North America that goes straight to a bank. They go to the VC, there's angel investors, there's venture capitalists, and then when you get to a certain scale, you may then take on some debt financing. The grant funding, that is a governmental thing. There is no bank that gives grant funding.
But I'm not suggesting that. I'm not suggesting that at all. I am only making the point, and I'm agreeing with you. It's all at stages because there's no way a venture capitalist is going to pick up a business proposal if he does not see it has potential, if it has not been tested. So there's no way would suggest that you go to venture capital. You all went to venture capital, I believe, because your project was fairly advanced. But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the basic level where people need grant funding to actually get it up to the scale where they can go to the grant funding. But we agree with you. You can't go to a bank if it is not that.
In wrapping, second answer. Painted the picture. Big question about having more of funds and having, I guess, individuals externally support human resources in yourself. But I think we also so I'm sure each time you extent pooling of what resources could be a substantial thing. I think in all of our efforts, not necessarily what if others do for us, but also what we do. And purposes that have that introspective and be able to be supported and open opportunities where we can crowd in and meet some of those solutions. And that role, wrapping this up, paint us a quick picture. 5 years from now, what do you think success looks like for each of you? In the smart business, a smart economy context. So 5 years.
Um, started, in 5 years, I would like to see us thinking sustainability, both of human capital and of energy and all the other factors across the economy from a financial services perspective to be on par with anywhere in the world in terms of how you interact with payments. I would like, and JB, to JB's point, that we are able to not just harness internal philanthropy, but investors in private investment through crowdfunding and other mechanisms focused internally, but also to attract in our whole move towards South-South cooperation, attract network that could set up the grant funding structures that you've spoken of, and to evolve these indicators of the vibrant capital market focuses on supporting innovation, like you see in some developed countries. So that's one.
Thank you, Mark, Nigel, can you hear us again now?
Slightly. You can attempt, yeah.
Would you like to give us your 30-second helicopter of what you think would be achievable in 5 years? What you expect to see in your pitch in 5 years?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So 30 seconds. So I think my first question posed to me was about what are the challenges, but I didn't get to say what we're actually doing and what we're actually achieving. So imagine energy powers the tools that we have. So you have, like, in the Middle East, they're sitting on like a vast reserve of oil. Imagine Barbados sitting on its own energy source, being like this lake of Sargassum, an oceanic rainforest of Sargassum, where in one day enough sargassum washes up on our shores that could power. It's hard to believe, but the scientists tell us the entire energy needs of Barbados for 30 days. It's just that and that technology was actually invented here at the University of the West Indies, Cave Hill. In 5 years' time, I think if we really wanted to, there's enough time that we could not import a single drop of oil coming into Barbados, and that we can make not biogas wouldn't be the only thing, but we can make enough fuel to power all of our generators, all of our transport on the road, not only with biofuel, but with the full suite of renewable energy that's available to us.
Excellent. I like that idea of turning that threat of sargassum that disrupted all of our economies in the region and turning that into a huge opportunity of powering our countries. And not that we want more sargassum, but the opportunity of making it work, because the things aren't going to go anywhere. So I think your idea of valorizing that threat is a great one that we need to practice. We'd like to see that happen a lot more. And congratulations again. Mark, your 30 seconds.
I think in 5 years, there's not something that should be announced. So you should feel like, just imagine what to be doing. Government should really know about it. So as we say right now, we're trying to think about that. You can it is thinking about the providing services you need and developing and creating role, which should know what your kind of path that your life is going down, and giving advice and warning to tell you your chance of getting cancer, to tell you that you should get, maybe getting your colon check this year, it should be already. If you don't want to feel free. So I think that your interaction can be much more helpful with the government. I think we should have the rails down that allow developers, local and international, to build things on top of. And I think that we should be a magnet for talent, right? We should be a magnet for companies and for individuals to come to Barbados and experiment.
That sounds magical, and maybe that's sort of the headline of the interactions with government. Magical, I love that. Where my business Barbados is at as well. We're looking forward to being able to solve a lot of those things take time. And they take a lot of resources and a lot of collaboration. And I think what we're saying here is that we're looking forward to having that rich collaboration, be able to problem solve and pivot Barbados and springboard Barbados into the smart economy that we know we can have. So I look forward to us all being a part of that solution. But that brings us to the end of today's public discussion forum. And thank you, panel, for engaging us in a very enlightening, and I hope you found it as informative as I found it. We indeed have a lot to look forward to as Barbados transforms its creative and innovative industries for global competitiveness. Special thanks to Sagicor Bank for their sponsorship of this instrumental event and hosting us today. On behalf of the BIBA Board, the Secretariat, and its strategic partners, we also want to highlight the premium sponsors who made 2025 Global Business Week possible and successful. The diamond sponsor of Invest Barbados, the platinum sponsor of the International Business Unit, gold sponsors of Central Bank of Barbados, Tabit Insurance, and CIBC Caribbean, the silver sponsors of Clark Gibbons Pharma Attorneys at Law, KPMG, Bank of Nova Scotia, EY, PwC Eastern Caribbean, Sequel SRL, Credit Trust, Next Caribbean, and Vistra Barbados. Thanks also to our supporters and all participants and delegate supporters of all of our events throughout this last week. Thank you to all of you who took time to join us today, whether in person or virtually. We look forward to seeing you at future BIBA events. Have a great and safe weekend. Thank you.
Thank you.